You're on mute, Mark.
Mm. Now I'm unmuted. Hey, everybody. I've muted again. And it's Sunday, March 23rd, and it's Tinderbox weekend with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. And uh, here's Michael.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the meetup. Typically, what we do, we're here to talk about tools for thought and our projects we're working on, particularly Tinderbox and its ecosystem of applications we use to manage our personal knowledge. We typically go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves. Don't see anyone new today. We then would jump into questions that people have about projects they're working on. And then if we have a theme, we discuss that theme. Next week, we do actually have a theme. It's going to be Jacob Evans, who's going to be talking about his integrations with ChatGPT and Tinderbox and all things AI, which will be super interesting. And this week, we do not have a theme, but I have several of my own questions that I'll want to bring up and demonstrate. And I believe Mr. Anderson has something to show for us today, too. Is somebody on the forum last week posted a question about doing a find, and I got a burr under my button about trying to figure that out, and then I passed that burr on to Mark incidentally, and he continued working on it. So I think we have something to show today. It's not complete, but we want to show the dialogue around that. So with that in mind, let's go around the room. Does anyone have any projects they're working on, things they want to talk about, discuss? Anything new? What's happening with you and Captain's Log there, Dave? Anything new this week?
But the tag thing can get a little unwieldy perhaps as you go along. So I'm considering creating a two-tiered tag system. But that prompted a whole another stream of consciousness, and I've been looking at Johnny Decimal. The idea is, how do I find the things that I'm capturing? I've got capture down pretty good, and they're all captured chronologically. So now I want Tinderbox to gather things together that are related so that I can find them easily. And so what is the best tag structure to do that? I don't have anything to offer. Find is perhaps the most powerful thing. If you have a general idea of what the topic is or whatever, then, perhaps find is the best solution. But I'm hoping for something a little more organized in time for our big move up north. So there's projects associated with moving, and then projects associated with building a new house and things of that nature. So,
All right. Thank you. Hey, Art, what's up?
Hey everybody. I woke up this morning with a sort of a lucid dream vision of having a concentric ring shaped adornment, because I actually want to create something that indicates to me like a radar, like incoming flow of things that have different levels of importance. If I was able to not stack really, but have concentric rings in and out of each other, that would help me do that.
I suspect there is a JavaScript visualization that you could possibly leverage for that somewhere out there in the world.
Oh dear, you lost me at Java. Uh,
Well, it's
okay.
basically poster. When we talk about posters, right? You take
Okay.
the values from your notes and you feed them into a poster, and it does its thing and spits it out a visualization for you.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
how about a big circle with a little circle inside it and centered, and another little circle inside that and centered?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. But the idea of something belonging or being sticky to a specific adornment without then impacting the other ones is something I was sort of in my head wondering about. I suppose it could get to that, but
But again, when you say adornment, that means something. That's the visual accent on a map view. I mean, again, would
yeah,
you want to consider it as a poster, aka remember when we built a table for you doing in the visual map view? If you were to
yeah.
create a template, to Mark's point, that would create concentric circles and drop notes in those circles depending on their status. That could be done developing a template, using a template in a poster view.
Hmm.
But I
I think
sort
I
of
don't
like the
understand that.
idea of the adornment too.
Yeah, I do too. I'm just suggesting that adornment means something versus a visualization. I mean, you could do the visualization possibly in an adornment, but trying to get the terminology so we don't get confused.
Just one
I'm
other
just trying to
thing.
keep it in a sense simple in the sense, and also be able to arrange adornments in such a way that they can, I'm just also thinking along the lines of what we've been talking about flattening diagrams and things like that. And the idea of having one adornment like inside and outside of the other without overstepping each other seems kind of interesting and attractive.
So, Art, just a couple of
Yeah,
things. If you're
sure.
going down that route with, as you're aware, you can only see adornment on a map. So, you want to start, if you're going to build up a set of adornments, start with the biggest one at the back first,
Oh,
and then
of
put
course.
the next one on top of it. And just one other thing to bear in mind is if you're going to be using things like on ads, so effectively when you with an adornment, if people are not already aware, when you put a note onto it, it fires the adornments on ad. So you want
Sure.
to bear in mind you have a clear view of what part of the note that you're moving triggers which on ad.
Right.
Because if you put
Got
it
it.
halfway across the edge of a circle, just because it's probably different. I can't remember off the top of my head. It may be, for instance, if it, for sake of argument, if it was the top left of the rectangle, if you did it on a left side left side boundary of the circle, then the one on the left of the boundary would fire its on ad. If you did the same on the right side, the top left corner of the rectangle will be inside the inner one. Do you see it? So just
I
an argument
understand.
to bear. I mean, the point is once you know those things, then they're not troublesome. But just something to
Then it
bear in
starts
mind.
playing.
Otherwise, it might trip you up.
Got it. So just watch out the anchor location. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so Art, on that note, you might do something like this, right? So you create an adornment with concentric circles,
Yes.
and then you do an on ad, and then if you run an agent on that page, it would pull all of the aliases onto their appropriate circle.
Basically, right. That's what I was thinking. But then it won't actually, if I'm using, say, untitled, say these are called untitled A and untitled B, or adornment A, adornment B, it wouldn't necessarily pull onto the wrong adornment, right? If I said for it to go to A, it wouldn't kind of go on top of B, would it?
Well, it probably would. I mean, depending
Right.
on how, as it currently is, depending on how many notes pop up, it very well could be on A, but it would look like it's on top of B.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm trying to avoid, the sort of intersectionality or the union aspect of it,
Yeah.
and keep them separate. But okay, cool. It's something worth playing around with.
Yeah. And
Thank
again,
you.
to restate your problem, what was it? It's like items in their workflow states, like halfway done, partly done, kind of like a
So
con.
it started with the visualization of like, because I'm doing sort of a complex project and I want to allow myself various pathways through this project, but I also want to be able to unite them in terms of the radar concept in the sense of what's incoming. So if I go down path A, then for the next several months, this selection of things are incoming. If I go down path B, that line of things are incoming, but they're not necessarily always different.
And what do you mean by incoming?
I'll tell you what. I'll try to sketch one out while we are going, and it may
Okay.
take me about 5 or 7 minutes, and I'll throw a
Yeah, that
JPEG
would be
up or
great,
something.
because if we can be more concrete about the problem,
Understood.
we'll be able to
Understood.
visualize it.
Yeah, done.
Good. All right. Okay, anybody got anything else? If not, we'll let Mr. Anderson go, and then once he's done, I can demonstrate some stuff I've been doing with tables, which will be fun. And Mark, maybe you can restate the problem from the forum.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was the sort of pickup problem that I acquired via Michael. The underlying and there are sort of two sort of demos I'll be doing concurrently here, but the basic problem that started was somebody wanted to know, how do I find if a number of if which notes use a particular term or terms. So that the test that I undertook was, what I want to do is for for a note, so in this case, say article 1, there are a number of, and because I've done this for suggested values here, but there are a number of terms that we might want to look for co-occurrence. And the idea was, what I want is a stamp, so that when I just undo these, when I stamp this, it will tick anything that has the terms that I specify. So if I go in here, so we were looking for data and privacy, and yes, privacy and data are there, and privacy and data are there. So, and all I'm doing here is I'm deliberately making basically positive, negative tests for things, so that I've got something with nothing, I've got something with everything, I've got something with each individual term, and I've got something with each pair of terms. In this case, I was doing between 0 and 3. So for instance, I could go back here and I could actually add see, and I don't need to turn these off because the stamp will reset all flags, and lo and behold, there's only one that has all 3 items. Or I could go back and I could say, let's just do agency. And lo and behold, we find that four of the descendants here. I've only used direct children. In fact, the model I was sort of given was to look for descendants. So essentially, when I'm stamping article 1, it's going away and it's looking at all descendant items. And I'll show you in a moment the code that I used. There's also a log that appears. Just delete that. If I was to stamp this again, again, we'll do. Keep switching it up. If I stamp this again, you'll notice a log appears. So the other little thing we did was that thought it'd be useful to be able to have a log, which you tend to want to have on hand when you're fiddling with this, because you may be tweaking the code. And in an outline, it's really useful if the log goes above the thing you're looking at, because obviously in this case, I've got a few items. If that was 30 or 40 things and the log was underneath, it would be off the bottom of the screen. So it's kind of neat to have the log above that. So the first thing I did really was the logging. And in this file, which I'll share, first of all, we just tested making a log. I thought it'd be useful also to parameterize the log name, because again, if we're iterating stuff, like as not, you're going to want to, you might want to run a log and then, oh, I'll hold on to that one. I don't want to overwrite what I just worked out because I now want to test something different. Chuck, I see your hand up.
Yes, I was just going to comment that the issue of placing log files where you find them convenient can also be handled through agents and a simple query on prototype.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
because I deal with this. I deal with that problem all the time. I want my log files in a particular place so that anywhere in the document I can create and update log files. But then I do run into a situation where it'd be convenient if it were just sitting right there in my outline at a particular place. And I just use an agent for that. And that's just, that's so easy and solves the problem so neatly.
Yeah, I mean, you bring home the fact that there's sort of more than one way to do this, and which is the best way will really depend on what you're doing. Indeed, I mean, it might, for even one person, it might be the way you want to do it is different for different things. Anyway, the sort of the challenge I accepted in this was simply to put the log in front of the test we're doing. So if I get down here. So the first thing I did was this is a basic stamp, which I then went on to put into a function. And if I select this one here and I stamp the log, lo and behold, I get a log 8 just above it. And the way that was done, so the start of it is that we get a path for a log because we may not be operating. We don't know where we are, so there were some assumptions made that your log name is going to be unique. If you don't do that, you're just making a problem for yourself. So if we assume the log name, we're not going to have 2 log 8s. Therefore, we can basically by specifying the path of log 8, we will get the path of log 8. We're saying if it's not there, go make it and give us back the path, or else make the container of the already existing log8 to be the same container as the item we're stamping. So in this case, when I stamped it down at the bottom here, it's at the root. So we've moved log8 from wherever it was. So I could do this again. If I just move this up, if I move log8 up here, I go back and stamp this again. Log8 has been summoned for wherever it was, and it's now turned up, and it's adjacent to the thing we're doing. As I say, I mean, this is something I could see actually being quite useful when you're doing things in a very large outline and you're running a sort of localized test. You might, in this case, you might want to reuse the log, but you might want the log to follow you around, because I do find it actually, that I hadn't thought of it before, but I do find having the log immediately close to the thing I'm doing is there. The other thing, of course, is you can keep the log open if you've got enough screen space. You could have it open in a window, in which case it's not as important that it's close by, because one of the reasons you want it close by is so you can select it and look at it. So again, another thing you could just do is keep the log window open, and then you don't need to worry so much about where it is, as long as it's getting the right information. So so that was the test we did. So the next thing I thought to do is, well, let's make that a parameter. So in fact, I made two functions. I did think about putting a log clearing function as an option in there, but it means that you've got more parameters to pass. And when you're just trying to add a logging note to your code, you don't be faffing around trying to remember how many parameters you need. So I made a small function just to clear the log if you were maybe redoing a run, and the other one, which I've annotated here. So we check there's a name, and if there isn't, we actually warn the person that they haven't passed the name using the show panel, so they get a red panel, and that alerts you that, and you'll see it once, and once you've seen it once, then you'll remember, and you won't need to read the thing. I didn't initialize properly. And then we go through the same thing. The only difference is, and this is something that I can't for the life of me figure out why, is that whereas when I run it as a stamp, I can say sibling order, make the sibling order the number of the stamped note, which then pushes the stamped note down one. In other words, that you insert it before, and you do that by actually pushing what the log into the place it's at. Oddly, and I spent about an hour, and I don't know why, but if you do it via the function, you have to take one off. Otherwise, the log always ends up after the thing you stamped. There will be a reason, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out. Anyway, it works. So I only mention that because if somebody goes through the demo and said, well, that's odd. Why have you got a difference on this line here? That -1 is so that when we do, if I take this out and I stamp it, so in fact, if I was to stamp this, I get log8, and if I stamp it using the function method, it's there, and yet I used a different code, which ought to create a different result. Anyhow, so that's the logging bit. So the other thing we then did is I looked at that. This is the sort of code that I started with or was passed in. The one thing I did was I thought, okay, well, let's actually parameterize this more. So where are we? Oh, I'd taken the logging's not in there. The first thing I did basically was just to put it in some more explicit use of loop variables and add some commenting. Again, this is something you don't really need to do for yourself, but the problem if you're doing it for a general audience is that everyone's style's different. So I like to err on the side of caution, make things very declarative as to what they are. If people want to go through and change them to something else, that's absolutely fine. Or like it's not, they may build it. In reality, a lot of people may go and take this, say, I see this idea, and then they'll go and build it, and they'll use their own styling, and that's fine. But hopefully this is reasonably clear. We're building a list of IDs, so we get the IDs of the descendants, we add in the current note. That's just a logging thing. And then iterate the list. We set the checked for each note that we're going to test false in case it's already been set true. And then we basically build a query. So we say, is the ID of this note the ID we're testing? And then does it contain however many terms we've got? So if we have 3 terms, this will loop around 3 times. If we have 1, it's only 1. And there's a slight branching here because the AND join is only used if there's more than 1 item and it's not the last item in the set. And then basically, having got this, we can evaluate and say, well, okay, so there's our, sorry, we make the query, then we want to run the query, and we're basically saying if this query is true or false. And the one thing you need to do here is, although we've built a search term from these bits of string here, then we need to use an eval to make sure that the if, because otherwise you feed it in and it's always true. Why is it always true? Because you said if string, and it says, yes, there is a string here. So that's true. And this is the natural way in which the querying system works. If you give it something and it's not sufficiently explicit, it sort of cascades down to saying, is there something here or not? And evidently, if you put a string of some length in there, it is something. So that's a true. And then having evaluated if it's true, we tick the item. And if not, it's false. And again, I was just putting some logging in here. And so you can just see, I was going through to just check that. And again, once you've done this, you wouldn't use that and you'd be removing the terms. Yes, Delef.
Why did you use the eval function for the string instead of using a second function to do the same? Because eval, I normally by eval I get cautious because sometimes it takes a lot of time. It's normally a slow function eval.
I didn't because I didn't need to. I mean, you absolutely could. There's no reason why not. Like all these things, there is you know, I mean, there's a sort of stylistic choice. So you could do that. Put it this way, it wasn't a deliberate choice. The main thing I was doing here was trying to take something that wasn't quite working and get it working. And then as I left in some of the earlier test notes, so people could see. So it's to also help understand the process. So you start with, here's the thing I want to do. You work slowly towards it. And so, for instance, at this point, which is, I mean, that's the sort of, as it were, the finished thing. Now, for instance, there's no reason that you couldn't take that even further and put more parameterization off into functions if you wanted. There's also a balance here. I was thinking about this. The more functions you put in the more places, you then say, how easy is it for me to pick this up and pass it to somebody else? Because again, if you're doing it for yourself, you don't really care. Unless you're going to want to move it between lots of your own Tinderbox files, in which case you might think, it would be easier if it was just in one place. So there are a number of factors here, and there is no one size fits all correct answer. But I certainly take your point that yeah, you could have used a function. The main point I was making about the eval is simply that if you were reading through this, you might think, well, why are you using an eval? It's that if you were to just do, if you were to fall into the trap of doing this, it would always be true for everything, because the string has more than 0 characters in it. Chuck.
I assume that you could have done vstring.empty and gotten the same result.
No, because what we want to do is we actually want to evaluate the query that's stored in the string. So the problem is if if I was to write,
Oh, okay.
if I was to write the query literally, it would run. If I pass it as a literally, if I pass it as the value of a variable, what goes in there is a string. So I need to give an extra prod to the system. So, oh, by the way, this isn't just a string. I need you to do. I need you to do something with it. And magically when you evaluate it, it's a query, and you get the query result. So it's a bit of a shim there.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. What you've created is a query, not a string of. Okay, I got it. Never mind.
Yeah, because it basically it'll say, it'll say something like, $ID, ID, it'll say something like, I'll use one number, but 1 = 1, and text 1 contains data. So that's what you get. In fact, did I put?
And again, the whole point of this is we were trying to approximate like the Devon think near option. And so this works when you're autonomizing your notes and you're getting smaller blocks of paragraphs or smaller blocks of content within your Tinderbox, within a project or an article, so that you can generally find the note that's got these multiple terms.
Right.
And this one is just exactly the same as above, but I've just put in more comment because depending on how familiar you are with the action code, it just might be useful to understand the processes going on. The other thing I did was I basically made a set for the terms, and then I put the suggested terms in. So if I was doing this is the kind of thing, if I was doing this in a large document, and maybe I was searching different sort of sub branches or branches of the overall outline, possibly for the same broad set of terms, it's kind of useful to have those there, because then because by having them there, the suggested values, so for instance, data's not being used, but the reason it's showing up there is not because actually any note is using it for this attribute. It's simply that it's coming out of the suggested values that are being put in there. So it's another nice little sort of just example for people who aren't familiar with it of how suggested values can work. But in other words, so for anything I'm going to test, so I mean I could go up here and I could do search set, yeah, that's the one, and we'll go for we'll just put data in there, and if I stamp this, my log 12 got reused because I'm using the same code that at the moment is hard set to use log 12. And something I haven't done here is realistically, you'd make that a parameter probably set by a displayed attribute or something to pass that in. Whatever it is that helps you find that. I just didn't get around to taking that out of a direct attribute. But you can see that now I'm now solving. I'm actually testing all these things. These have no content, and they were only there to make sure when I was trying to work out why the log wasn't getting moved into the right position, whether it was a problem it being the first one or the last one. So I wanted to make sure that, depending on the test I was doing, that it was up against either the beginning or end of the container, or actually was safely in the middle. And that, in a nutshell, what's the other thing I put in there? And I did just make an uncheck thing. So if you were doing that and you just wanted, you've done the last test, you want to clear up, then you could uncheck. So there's nothing particularly sophisticated here. It was the underlying idea was just say, can I quickly go through and find out if any of the notes in a branch basically contain all the terms that I'm looking for. And there's a solution, and as has already been shown, there are other ways of setting the log position, and there are other ways of passing the query into the final test. Are there any questions? So that sounds like a resounding no, which is fine. Obviously, I'll send this to Michael, and that'll go up on the forum for anyone to tinker around with if they would like. And I'll stop sharing. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Anybody else have any other projects they're working on? And this is a great example of participation in the community. And I don't think the person who made the post even knows that Mark and I have been playing with this for the last 3 days. So we'll follow up with him as well and just say, yeah, here's a solution that the community worked on for you. Anybody else have any? Yeah, Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on something that Detlef mentioned. If I heard you correctly, you were suggesting inserting a function into the library as an alternative to the eval. So you'd make a note, set the text to the text of the function, and poke it so it gets evaluated, and then you'd be. It's interesting. We really are in the Lisp world.
Wouldn't you still somewhere inside the function? Surely you still need to evaluate. You're going to create this string that represents query, and at some point you still got to tell Tinderbox that this string is actually a query, and I want you to evaluate it as a query. So how do you? So even if you put basically a function call in the if test, surely inside the function, how are you going to tell Tinderbox that you want it to be?
Well, you write the function instead of writing the query string. You write a function that returns the query string. You still have to evaluate it, but you evaluate it once when the library runs.
So, but if the library function returns the query string, that's no different than passing.
No. But suppose instead of so you define a function query, which takes an argument of the path, and if the name of the path equals some string, then return true, else return false. Okay, that's easy enough. Instead of just constructing the query, construct the function that does the query, and then you call the function. That might conceivably be a little more efficient. Most of the time, if you're like calling this from a stamp, it doesn't matter because anything that's user initiated is going to be going on at such a slow rate that it doesn't matter. So this is mostly gilding the lily, but it's an interesting alternative to using eval. Is just have Tinderbox write a function for itself.
Okay.
All right. What else does anybody else have? Bruce, how's your book coming along? If you're there. And then I see Art, you posted your picture. You want to share that with us and maybe share your screen and talk us through it?
Yeah, so this is a really basic example I just pulled together.
Maybe you can share your screen so others that are watching the video can see it. They can see the chat.
I just made a JPEG, so it's not really in Tinderbox or anything.
No, I know, but can you share the screen of your JPEG?
Okay, let me see.
Because the people that are watching this video won't be able to see it.
So I can share a specific
File.
app. Okay, hold on a second. This might be it. I don't know. It just says unknown, so I have no idea whether it is actually this. Hold on a second. Never shared before. All right. Oh, sorry, you have to open system settings and allow Zoom to share screen.
Here, I can do this.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I have to leave the meeting for some reason. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's a permit. It's a privacy.
Yeah.
All right, so there you go. Mark,
Thank you.
So go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so all I'm trying to point out is like, so here is a sort of two paths to go to the same destination, to the same end goal. But as I'm developing the ideas, I may come up with increasing levels of complexity. So like today I'm determining my strategy. Now I may decide to work with this partner or not, or work on my own on this project. So if I work with the partner, the next point in terms of the time and priorities, I'm going to have to sign a contract. If not, then I'll have to incorporate a new entity. And then if I'm incorporating the entity, I'll place my own orders. If I'm actually signing a contract to work with this person. So things start getting more complex and more sort of diversified, but at the same time, I'm curving around to meet the same end goal, which is the launch date for the project. And as I go along, there might be certain on route goals that are shared, and that some that are unique. But I'm still constrained in terms of my time. So if I may use a term, it's like a temporal radar. It's March, April, May, June. That's sort of my time goal. But it could be anything really. It could be levels of priority. It could be plot points in a narrative. Could be anything really.
So a comment.
Oh yeah, sure.
The I actually played with something like this many years ago, but in the Navy, you mentioned radar, but radar gives you, by its very design, two dimensions, a range and a bearing to an item of interest. The threat warning receiver, the SLIC 32, is a passive device. It only receives a signal and can tell you the bearing. Can't tell you anything about how far away it is. But
Mm,
the Navy loves circular plan position indicator displays. So
mm.
that concentric, that radial dimension had to have some meaning. And what they assigned it to was that the highest threats would be closest to own ship. Own ship is always considered in the center. And then
Zero, yeah.
the second ring would be signals of interest, that perhaps a search radar from a submarine or an aircraft or something like that. And then the outer ring are other signals that are of low interest or priority. I think that's how it was arranged. So
Mhm.
when you're using a map view, you have, typically X and Y dimensions to to place items on the map, and that regions of the map, in this case, adornments, imply some semantic meaning, that they are placed here for this reason, or not over here because they don't belong over there. So when you use a
Definitely.
radial thing, what I did was I was dividing it into quadrants. You had your work life, your home life, your hobbies, and your whatever, and that
Mm,
you oriented information on that circular display based on quadrant, or you could divide sections of the pie, and then where it was radially implied some meaning as well. The things closer to the center were more relevant, more important, more something, while those at the circumference were less. So I'm just offering that to you as you think about this further, that you want to make sure that you exploit both dimensions of your configuration.
Oh yeah, I visually completely see what you're saying, and that's a good point. And I think the only differentiation I think I would have here is sort of more akin to your example of using it in the Navy or of ownership, is I am constantly moving in this. It's not a topography, it's not a map or way of going, nor is it one that is actually setting up um the things moving toward me in the sense that, oh, here's an incoming that's a high priority in my personal life, so I should take it on first. I'm more thinking is if I embark upon this project, me always being in the center, these particular targets, these particular hit points, these destinations, these en route locations that I'm going to meet, I will still be in the center at all times, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, exactly. No, you are own ship. I mean, and
Yeah.
so I'm again suggesting that in that conception of using rings, you have two
Hmm.
dimensions. Exploit both of them. Just
Understood. Absolutely. Yeah. Chuck?
Yeah, I was wondering why the radial structure, a layered approach, either columns going across. So if you use your diagram, you could have March be a shaded column to the right, and then to the right of that, you could have another shaded column that could be April and then May and so forth, and show the exact same thing. I was wondering what motivated you to think in terms of a radial structure?
No, like
And
for
is there some distance factor that you wanted to reflect in that radial structure? Distance or
no,
bearing?
yeah, it's a good point. Not really, actually. It was more in terms of the fact that, like I said, I'm embarking on, maybe I have two paths to take. At any given point, I should be able to split those paths and then reconnect with an object down the road. Now, if I were to break it out into, say, a linear way of looking at it, it just means my arrows and my curves would be longer and shorter, and it could string it out any way you want.
Mhm.
But it just feels to me visually and in terms of sort of the temporal limit that um and it's something like if you're going to write down a project with a timeline, but you're not just working with one project timeline, you're working with 3 or 4 different project timelines which share or uh, what's the word for it? Divert. Um, it's easier to sort of round up and come back to that particular point is all. Now, in this example, for example, it's month-wise. So I know that by no matter which project pathway I choose, that by June I'm going to have to be doing X. It's my launch date or whatever. It's just easier for me to visualize and see and then map it. Yeah, Mark?
I sort of started from actually the same point as Chuck, but just a couple of other things that I do recall trying to do. I can't remember what reason for, but something similar. And actually, what I found was that I ended up needing a bigger and bigger circle because actually, as you begin to spread around the circle, then when you have crosstalk between various links between various sort of threads going outwards or inwards, doesn't really matter which. Then they start running through the middle of the circle, which wasn't quite really what you intended. So actually, if you take your circle, cut it, turn it round into a block, you may find it useful. And you can still have streaming within that. So you can always do things like you can make a note of, it's not 0. You basically can make a note work like a line or an adornment rather. It's somewhere in aTbRef. But so in other words, you could have dividers. So you could still have, for instance, you could have your progress in time going whichever way you wanted across the screen. You could have themes of concurrent things. You might have separate projects, but you might have, for instance, a couple of projects that both interacted, say, with another collaborator, but the same collaborator. So they can be running along, and then they can cross connect, or you can have separate layers in your diagram that maybe home projects versus work projects and things. My gut feeling is that if you're wanting to have this sort of sense of a transition and to have the scope for some sort of splitting and joining, it's probably more easily done if the broad direction of travel is along one axis. Doing it
Yeah.
radially, it'll be fine. But if you took your model above and put 3 of those side by side and then connected the left one, the leftmost one with the rightmost one, your lines will start going through a different period. And therefore that's confusing to the eye, because really you want the things that are happening in the sort of orange band, ideally that even the link lines all stay in the orange band and don't, for instance, go through one above or one below.
Okay, this is an excellent set of points. I think let's try to address them one by one. I think so on the first line of it is I take your point about organizing things in sort of vertical and unfolding manner, like more like a project or Gantt chart, project timeline. And of course, it's easier than in terms of listing the number of tasks that you might have on any given path. However, in this particular example, I'm sort of searching for the shortest line between 2 nodes, which is much easier for me to visualize like this. And then, of course, let me split out the next part into 2 things. One is that Tinderbox being sort of a visualization application, I should be in a position where I can just create aliases and create a version of this polar visualization that is more akin to your or a Gantt timeline. And the other aspect of it, I think, is this particular polar model is constantly under review. So literally, just like Frodo walking through the Shire, I'm actually going to be able to look at any given time. I could actually move my bullseyes, or move myself accordingly through the sort of the map and the destinations that I've set out for me. So anyway, just had this thought as I woke up because I've been, bothered by this within the last couple of days, and I was like,
Yeah, and
how do you get an adornment around an adornment without getting it on top of the adornment?
is there any kind of industry standard project management method for that? I mean, like Chuck, you were referring to like a Kanban method, right? When you have those columns and you move the items through the different. Is there a reference method we can think of?
There are so many. I mean, if you get into the world of projects and building things and so forth, there are so many different ways of diagramming things out in a horizontal fashion and in a vertical fashion, for trying to show relationships between things. One of the things I was going to suggest is that a common term used in many of these representations is swim lane. The idea is that you got a big swimming pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and there are a bunch of lanes, and there can be totally different things going on in those games, on those lanes. And if you think about, swim teams, they're running one race in 3 lanes, and they've got another race going on in the adjacent 2 lanes, and then they've got kids playing around with a ball in the last couple of lanes. So you got totally different things going on in the lanes, but yet somebody's got to keep a picture looking at the overall structure, looking at all the interactions. When does this project finish, its use of a swim lane so that somebody else can use it? Those kinds of things. And I think there are just so many ways that people structure theirs. There are so many layered architectures that exist. And whether they're reflected into a timescale or into a procedure arrangement or the alignment of various things. I mean, you talk about building a skyscraper. People are going to talk about, the layer of getting the foundation in, and then the layer of getting the framing in place. And then once you got the first floor framing in place, you can put in the second floor. All these kinds of things exist. And I was just intrigued that you picked a radial structure, and I thought it was fascinating. And I was just kind of curious what drove you to that, which is why I asked the question.
I think it's primarily, so if I were to pull this from your example, just at first sort of hit, if I looked at the swim lane thing, I think I would be thinking about this in terms of like a triathlon. So I have various pools, and at the end of every segment of the triathlon, I'm actually reconvening at a node. And so what happens is, like, supposing like literally if I'm looking at doing a project, and if I decide to take decision A, it creates 2 or 3 nodes ahead of me. If I take decision B, another set of 2 or 3 nodes. I just in initial planning, I don't want to forget those nodes. I want to be able to go like, oh, okay, I chose not to go with path B, but in the detritus, in the sort of graveyard of the different nodes that were in path B, I can still keep this on my polar map and maybe not regard it. I gray them out. But now I'm taking this particular journey. Is it possible that one of those nodes is something I might encounter on taking, option D or I mean path D or path E? And not to forget those is really my main thing. That's why the polar example, because there are some deadlines or some intermediate nodes that are going to be inevitable, no matter which path I take. So, I mean, if there's no other questions, I'm just going to leave this there and let the meeting continue, because I really haven't given much more thought to it than this. I'm just trying not to forget. I may end up with just using a vector app, which I did now, to mock this up and then just keep that as my, base template, and even import that into Tinderbox as a static reference image. That's also workable, in the worst case.
And Art, one thing I may encourage you to try is do a search on the internet for JavaScript radial visualizations.
Got it.
And you may come across a JavaScript that presents an image just like you're thinking, and then you can come back to the community and say, okay, now how would I feed note values into this image?
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
So that,
and then
that way,
posterize
don't be
it.
afraid of the JavaScript, because you won't have to be the one to do it, right? You can post it on the community and have somebody else who wants to pick it up try it.
Right. Well, yeah, I will say, just as a point of humor, I was at a book sale a week ago and I found an O'Reilly's book on JavaScript, which I picked up because it was really cheap. But I don't have the courage to open it. But I will one day.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and
thanks so much,
again,
guys.
the whole point is these libraries, just like anything else, take inputs and outputs. So your notes are the inputs, and they're passing inputs into that library, and then the library generates the visualization for you, and then that's presented as a poster.
Yeah.
And so then, to the extent that in the library, to the extent that libraries have done a decent job, which some of don't, they'll say, here are the variable, here is the inputs that we need for this visualization to get you what you want.
I exactly understand what you are saying, and my only response on that is that just given the fact that I have such a scattered and non um, non-continuously conforming methodology of thinking and operating, it's like I may do all that and I may use it one time and never again. Whereas something like an ability to set either concentric or however you mention it, but adornments within adornments without them touching each other, I think is a sort of an attractive general bit of toolkit that we might all be able to use, if that makes sense. Yeah, Chuck.
Well, along those lines, and I apologize if this sounds like an advertisement, but this is exactly the kind of thing that you could do with the diagramming tool that I've been working on. And the advantage of it would be that you could take notes from anywhere in your document. You could put up your concentric adornments as you showed in the picture, and then just put those notes anywhere, those adornments, and you could achieve the visuals before.
Okay.
So,
Well, I will try to run that. I think for me, as I see and as I've understood your it's so powerful. Unfortunately for me, is like I do need a kiddie chair in order to get to that diagramming tool. And my goal in doing this was to actually have a sort of a visual thing that I could. That's how I start with Tinderbox always, is with something visual. And so, yeah, something sort of like a precursor to the diagramming tool.
Yeah, along those lines, I have been working on enhancing the diagramming tool. The excuse me. The big thing that I've been trying to address, in case anybody's interested, is I had left out or had simplified the reflection of links from your main document into the diagram. I'd taken a bunch of shortcuts, and I was trying to address all those shortcuts and deal with the issues that are really there. And I found out it's a much larger problem than I had originally anticipated. So, for example, you might have in your main document notes, two notes, which have multiple links between them, but for different types. Well, that winds up being a complication if I want to try and reflect those links to show up in the diagram. If you do something, which is what got me really tuned in on this, you create a link between two notes that are also in your diagram, and you then say, oops, I selected the wrong link type. So you delete that note and then put in another link, or excuse me, you delete the link.
You don't delete the note, you delete the link, right?
You delete the link, put in another link with the correct type.
Hmm.
Now then you've got a problem. How do you synchronize that change with the diagram? So those are the
Right,
kinds of
okay.
convoluted logic statements that I have wound up getting myself into trying to deal with all that. But I hope I'm getting close, and I will, as soon as time is available, I will try and publish an updated version. The other thing I'll just mention is really nice refinements to Tinderbox coming. They're going to make it far easier for people to integrate packages like the diagramming into their documents without having to go through contortions or configuring lots of things. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of achieving that. Michael Becker is way ahead of me on all this, but for something where you want to take just a specific capability like diagramming and put it into your document, I'm hoping that it's an approach that will be much more feasible for anybody to deal with. So those are a couple of things that I'm working on, and along with some other cleanup and straightening and housekeeping to try and make it a more robust tool.
Oh, nice. Okay, so I'll keep following and I'll keep trying to apply, what I have in my head to this current iteration and the future ones. Thanks, Chuck. And yeah, of course, in terms of backstage and front stage, I mean, there are 2 or 3 lines of development in terms of directly how it affects Tinderbox and its utilization and sharing and the complexity and putting in AI and things like that, which is kind of mind blowing. I think it's moving way too fast. I want to be one of those guys who basically stops following threads.
Well, let me
Chris.
while I've got people's attention on this particular topic, let me ask a question and try and get some feedback. I don't think we have any particular conventions for somebody sharing something which may be updated over time. And what I was going to suggest was I could put up a post where I always have the latest version of, let's say, the diagramming tool. And then that post could exist for whatever time frame it's relevant and useful to people. And anytime that an update occurs or somebody finds a problem with it or things like that, you'd have a thread that would say what was going on. Does that sound like a reasonable way to work with the community, or are there other ideas on how to handle that type of problem? And Michael, you've probably been giving thought to that as well. So I just like
honestly,
some feedback
that's part of the reason why I started my 5C school. Right. And so I've basically set up a Teachable account, and I'm publishing my latest updates through that. Other people like Bernardo 3-4 years ago from Brazil had a GitHub where he put his files on a GitHub. In theory, we could, and maybe that might be interesting to do, is create a new category. I mean, there is in the forum, there is a Tinderbox examples category in the forum, but that's never really been maintained. So maybe one thing we could do is create a much like the page I have for the video libraries.
Yep.
Right. So maybe we create a category where we say, I don't know, owned libraries or something like that, and that's where people, and it's not that somebody wants to own a page and then they keep maintaining it and modifying it and editing it. We could do something like that. Or for now, what you would do, I would just encourage, where we have our because we already have the category, file examples. You could just post a post under file examples and then just maintain that.
Yeah,
every time you did an update, it would show up on the main page saying this file's been updated.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was thinking. But if people thought there was a more convenient way to do it, or something else that might be appropriate, I think using the GitHub approach would be an impediment for some people, whereas everybody uses the forum. So that was my thinking. But on the other hand, I didn't want to keep polluting, one thread that dealt with a bunch of questions about how to do something with the actual providing of that something to be reused by people. That was what I was getting at. All right, thanks.
Awesome. Mr. Bruce.
I don't know if this is relevant for your discussion right now, Chuck, but I don't know if people are aware, Michael, I think you use it. Camtasia is coming out with a new free tool, and it'll come out this spring. And what it is it's an online screen recorder that allows for collaboration as well. And you can store it. So a lot of times, I mean, we're doing demos and things, so there's obviously a visual element at times to problem solving. And it struck me that I sat in on the early adopter, demo that they did earlier this week, and it's quite impressive what they basically put Camtasia online. And for those of you, Camtasia is a screen recording program. And this free tool will come out this spring. So I will post in the forum once it's available and see if other people might find that useful for being able to demonstrate and collaborate.
Again, I guess I don't understand. What does that mean, though? I mean, it's just they're hosting video libraries.
Well, yeah, they have their online storage called Screencast, and I'm not quite sure. I think it's a free version of it, and I'm not quite certain the details of it. But what I'm thinking is, I mean, if you or others wanted to problem solve, you want to show a demo, it's up to 5 minutes. You can do 5 minutes at a time, and it just strikes me that because it also has pointing and other, some of the other demonstration presentation elements built into it. So it may turn out that I'm completely off base, but I'll just pass it along when it becomes available and see if it's of any use. Maybe just send it since Chuck and Michael, you two are kind of talking about this. Maybe just pass it to both of you, let you play with it, and see if there's any utility to it.
Awesome. Okay, Mr. Art, hands back up.
Oh yeah, I was just going to point out that when you're talking about your own section in the forum to post things, it might be an interesting way of looking at it to link it via some kind of a wiki. And because that allows you to proliferate, like I might come up with an idea and then somebody else might build on it, and then it might extend in a certain direction.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the challenges I've found personally with a lot of this is, well, again, given my bent on privacy and self-sovereignty and decentralization or centralization of the individual, I mean, the more we start using cloud-based services like that, the more we get indentured to them and we become serfs to their infrastructure. Moreover, we become we don't know what they're going to do with that data, right? So you have a balance of the convenience of using the cloud-based service developed by a company, and then you're be ever holden to their terms, and then they can change their terms of service at will. And one day it's all great and everything's happy, we'll do no evil, and then the next day they're mining the hell out of you and selling all your content, and you can absolutely do nothing about it. So you've kind of got that spectrum that you need to consider when you're using these services. The convenience of a cloud-based service to which they're doing the thinking for you, to a interim mid-wiki that you maintain, to something you maintain totally yourself. That's the spectrum that I think of when I consider these things.
Oh no, I was just wondering if there's like a wiki style plugin for the existing forum engine. I don't know what it uses, but it seems to be a pretty widely used type of forum software.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about. I don't know that about Discourse. We'd have to look.
I recall that I think a thread can be turned into some wiki-like thing. I do recall, actually, I think it was Paul Waters, who I know is sort of fairly all about on Discourse forums. I had a look at it. I thought, the trouble with anything wiki is, I know from days back when Tinderbox had a wiki, the number of people who want to post on wikis and the number of people who know how to write wiki sort of entries are a very small intersection. No disrespect to our community, but I'm just thinking about whether that just means there's an awful lot of tidying up has to be done by the limited number of moderators. But we can take a look at it.
All right. Anybody else have
Well,
any other thoughts?
Just on that, one of the other things that we can do, and that I've been doing with the things I've been sharing, is putting the basic documentation that people need, as well as perhaps, you know, I'm even including some of my notes on, you know, what's broken and what needs to be fixed, and indicating when I fixed it in the document that I actually share. So that's, in a sense, Tinderbox can create wiki-like documentation. And if we include that in the things we're sharing with people, then we provide both the item that can be shared plus the documentation that goes with it. And if we are successful in getting some of the package installation processes straightened out, then you can add a capability to your document without necessarily bringing in lots of technical notes about that, but yet still distribute them. So I'm just thinking of, you know, how we can, within a Tinderbox community, expand beyond what the discourse channel offers, to include things that you might not, you know, if I put all of my documentation up on the forum, you know, the posting is going to be huge, and that would be a distraction to people. I already write too much, you know, people are already telling me I said too much stuff out there. But, you know, if you just make it something that gets included with what you're sharing, then that's perhaps a rational way to deal with it. And I think would go further than what a wiki would offer. Just some thoughts.
Right. Mr. Hart, hands back up.
Yeah, I'm just so talkative this morning. Sorry. Maybe I'm the only one, but you know, all these moves towards transportability and exchange of document content and interoperability, it's beginning to seem to me like Tinderbox is sort of evolving into some kind of IDE. And we might at some point, like, you know, have a situation where we have so much data that we can share through the portal of our open Tinderbox app, that it starts getting sort of meta or beyond the size of any individual project file. Like, say for example, I open my Tinderbox project and I'm working on my thing, and then I go, you know, I remember Chuck was working on something diagrammatic, so maybe from within my Tinderbox I can sort of click and link to Chuck's personal repo of stuff that he's been working on and see his latest version of his diagramming tool and pull that in and then work on it. And it almost seems like we're entering this sort of sphere. Is just my casual observation on it.
Well, I definitely think Tinderbox is an IDE on a personal note. And honestly, that's what I'm developing, and I can demonstrate that now if you're interested. We have about 20 minutes left. A suite of publishing bundles and that's my whole intention. Like, here's the foundational template. Now, if you want to build dynamic lists from your notes, here's the list library and template. If you want to build tables from your notes, here's the table library and template. If you want to auto number your book chapter or article sections or figures or table numbering, here's that library. And you know, creating a series of you know, installable modules to be able to augment the capabilities of a particular Tinderbox file. That's exactly what I'm doing.
It sounds damn interesting. I would love to see what you have going.
Well,
But I'm
okay,
also
well,
like just wanting to.
I can share it with you guys right now if you want.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to put a pin also on the idea of the fact that we're working both within a Tinderbox project and also then within the larger sphere of all Tinderbox projects at any given time
Well,
these days.
there's certainly that. And then I would also argue, if we would take one step backward from that, you have your current self today and you have your future self tomorrow. Right. So how does one interoperate with themselves, or in the context of the work I'm doing with Mary Beth, and not just thinking about, I mean, it's actually sharing libraries. In the context I'm doing with Mary Beth, we're co-authoring a book together. How do we have those her Tinderbox file, collaborate with my Tinderbox file, collaborate with like the master document of the book. And that's starts getting into the conversation of a GitHub like check-in, check-out experience too. You know, and it gets pretty complex really quick.
I'm wondering if all this becomes like more interesting or more of a headache for Eastgate.
I would argue the answer to that is unilaterally yes.
Yeah, both, right? Okay.
Okay. All right. So if you want, we can take. I can show you the latest toy I've been playing with the last couple days. All right.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So let me fire up my desk pad. And then maybe I can get a couple. I got my own questions for Mr. Eastgate here, so maybe I can get some help on that. So let's pop this up. Share screens. Okay, so Mart, you may have missed it last week, so I'll just do it again. So I've created, I'm creating a series of modules or templates. So this one's I'm calling the foundational template. So you can take this installer. Let me bring the new file over. Come on, my mouse is getting off. Right. So you can take this installer, paste it in, and that it instantly generates a file for you that you can, you know, immediately start, you know, working on and publishing your article. So you go from having nothing to having the infrastructure that you need to have a standalone article that you can be working on. All right. So that's one of the libraries I've created, what I'm calling the foundational template. Then if I take that a step farther, the next one I have released, and it's one that I use every day, all the time, is my create one, because we like to generate and have Tinderbox creating for us assets. So now what I've done is I've installed the automated note creation and link library into this foundational file that we've just created. And so I'll give you an example of that. So here's an example note that I've put in, and it's got a person and an entity. So you've populated Tinderbox attributes with values. And then if you go down here, for example, you'll see that that process has created a note, or my installer has created an example note called Michael Becker. And one of the things that Mark's doing on the back end is making it possible through action code that we can actually enable the libraries. But I'll have to manually tweak those right now just to get them to work. And so by doing that, you know, watch this. The second I touch this note, Michael Becker, I've got what I call an on-add or on-visit function. And the on-visit function is what triggers the action code, so I don't have to have a bunch of processing going behind the scenes. So I click Michael Becker, and visiting that note instantly creates all of the notes related to its attributes. And so you'll now see that there's companies associated with that entity, that note called Michael Becker. There's terminology there. And now that those libraries are set up, let's go ahead and go to it and do an example. And you'll see down here, there's art's not here. If I type in art Kurim, and let's call, you know, poets are us, right? Is your company, and maybe there's a terminology called poetry, right? So you can sit here and populate different attributes and terms. Now, if I click away from that note and come back, those notes automatically get generated. And then so essentially what Tinderbox is doing is helping you curate your atomic notes that you're developing as you're working on your projects. One of the other modules I'll be working on next week is then using agents to be able to index that and be able to create index and glossaries. So that's another library that's available. The other library that I have in the cadre is this one, which is my notes and lists library. So if we pull that one over, put it in and install it. And again, we'll go ahead and enable the notes and lists library. Okay, so we enable the notes and lists library. And then by doing that now, if you see here, you've got a bunch of notes. They have different attribute values to them. And then so sometimes visualizing your notes via lists are really important. And so, and it's not just, and so it's, you know, when I look at these templates in Tinderbox, I view them not just as means of writing the reports and means of export, but they're actually a means of internal visualization. So they help both with the publishing side of me doing work in Tinderbox, but they also help me with the thinking side of doing work in Tinderbox. So when I do that, if I'm gonna, and let me go ahead and install this demo helps better when you look at this lens through the standard Tinderbox note. So if I go here and I hit export and I change the export template for this individual note here. So if I'm looking at this note and I click that, I'm seeing a cascading hierarchy of the children notes, all highlighted with a heading 2 in its file. Now, if I go ahead and now change that template to the advanced list template, right? So this is now basically going to say, hey, at Tinderbox, I want you to build an HTML bulleted list from the notes. And I want you to, based on the flags that I have here, I want you to accent those lists with the flags that are being triggered. So now when I view that note, here's my bulleted list of those items, and you'll see different accented flags here. So if I want to say, hey, I just want the headings of these notes because I want to be able to copy these and put them into a PowerPoint file. You know, and start building my PowerPoint. That's why I'm doing that. And then eventually, once we have these auto updated things and some export stuff I'm talking about in the backlog, I personally am going to stop doing PowerPoint and I'm going to use Tinderbox as my PowerPoint. And I'm just going to be teaching out of Tinderbox directly because I can embed video and all that. Those are other visualization libraries that I'm doing. So once these kind of core 5 or 6 publishing modules that and thinking modules are done, I'm then going to turn my focus to building courses like publishing a book in Tinderbox, teaching in Tinderbox, doing sales presentations in Tinderbox, managing your marketing plans in Tinderbox. That's kind of the direction of where I'm going. Now, the new library that I just got working this morning, and I will be putting its, I've got to build out the installer later this week, is, let me find that one here, tables. So another big one is this. And Mark, I do understand, Mr. Anderson, I do understand your intentions. I almost got it fixed while we were talking. So this one here is, so let's imagine you have a notes. So in this case, you've got a synthetic soccer, football team, soccer team, and there's players that have different positions and different ages. Let's say you have a different set of notes with companies, and there's different attribute values associated with those companies. And again, to help both with thinking in Tinderbox from a visualization perspective, and or if you're writing a report or you're writing a presentation and you're wanting to get this stuff exported and published out of Tinderbox, whether or not that publishing being from copying and pasting the preview and pasting it into a Word document or a Google Doc, or pasting it or exporting it through Pandoc or one of the various other means. This is what I'm trying to do here. So if you think about this, what my library is essentially doing is it's saying, do you want to build a table? Yes, I do. Well, what columns do you want on the table? I want, and because, and Mark, this kind of, Mr. Bernstein, this kind of reflects on, this is the right way to do it because we've got so many people with older versions of Tinderbox. But for now, so I'm using dictionaries and essentially attribute name, colon, the label of the label I want to be rendered in the table. It would be really nice if that label could actually be a value of an attribute so that this dictionary wouldn't need to be built. But for now, I think this is the most robust and reliable way given the levels of versions of Tinderbox that are out there. But basically say these are the names that from the attributes of this note, or from the attributes of these children that I want to have be built into the table. And so if I go ahead and just render that, you'll see it's dynamically generated a table for me. Similarly, if I do that for companies, you'll see that it's dynamically generated a table from the listed companies. Now, the next thing I did, which was kind of fun, is let's say you want you want to pivot the table. So instead of having the notes be on the note names be the row headings, you want the note names being the column heads. So what I did there is I triggered a Boolean that says is table row children name. So by clicking that then pivots the table and makes the column heads be the note names. And now I've got a table looking like this way. Similarly, you can do that with companies. Oops. Okay, so same model that you've done there. Now, the other thing I did, which was kind of fun, and this is where I made a note to Mr. Anderson's comment, and something I'll work on. I don't want to say fix, but an approach that I'll take based on what he mentioned at the beginning of today's call. If you say here, so let's say if I'm going to look at the children's name, these notes here and these notes like this, and you'll see that there's a lot of duplication in this table. So region Europe is North America. So you're seeing so while this table is great for the visualization, it's starting to lose some fidelity because I've got in certain parameters I've got multiple items with the same data. So to help with that visualization, you want to collapse those. And so in HTML parlance, what you do is you use a row span. And so what I'm doing is saying HTML row span. And to make a row span work and to make the counting work, I then want to force the list to sort based on the note that I want to row span against. So then that way I can do a count. So that it will calculate how many notes fall within that particular row span. So if I say here, so what I'm going to do is I'm sorting the note by country. And then if I render it, you'll see that the table automatically row spans everybody that's North America. Similarly, if I tweak this and I say, no, I want to row span by region, the table automatically generates and row spans by region. And if you look at the export code, you'll see that the row span calculations are, row span 1, row span 6. So it's doing a calculation. Now, where my initial approach was working great, I naturally stumbled into something that was interesting. Let's say, so if I'm row spanning the players by age, you'll see that there are hang on, I've got to check the row span box. Row span the players by age, you'll see that the 20-year-olds are getting row spanned together. Now, let's say I want to row span by player position. And there is a fix for this, but the problem is you'll now see that this breaks. And the reason why this breaks is I'm using a methodology or an operator in Tinderbox called any occurrence of. So what I'm looking for is any occurrence of, and then in this context, the word forward. So let's just give you an example of that one and to show you how to fix it. Where's the word? Okay, so if I said there was no, I'm going to make that forward 2 now. So this Jackson Pierce, and I row span here. You'll see it now works great, and only the goalkeepers are being forwarded. The reason why that's happening is because there's no duplication of the word forward. You'll see here center forward. So when you're using any occurrence of, it's matching and then miscalculating the row spans because it's saying that there is more. And I'll show you the code right here just so you can see it. So when I do that, you'll see what's happening here is it's saying, and if I look down in the code, you'll see that this Perce Jackson is getting a row span of 2 because his name is forward, even though it's counting that forward as number 2. So what I need to do is not do it as any occurrence of, but do it as just a count of instances, and I'll have that fixed by the end of the day. So that's another element that I did in kind of producing and doing tables. Now, as we all know, I'm really focused on writing reports and publishing and getting stuff out of Tinderbox. So this is great for the doing it as a single note. This is really, really useful for the thinking in Tinderbox methodology and mentality. Now, similar to what I demonstrated last week, the ability to use macros to interject lists into anywhere in the notes, it dawned on me that I could do the exact same thing of using macros to interject tables into anywhere in my document. So let's say I'm generating a giant report, and I've actually curated this, and and this is really more likely the way I would do it. Tables folder. I would probably do this. Folder, and say, these are resources that I've curated over time. So I've got this table or list of players or something of that nature. That would probably be the way I would do it over time, but for the sake of not screwing up my file, I'll leave it at this. So let's say I'm saying Tinderbox, I'm writing this report, and I want to go call out to one of these tables that I've built somewhere else in the document, and I want to render it in this document. So what's happening here is this is calling my advanced list tables macro. That macro is and the macro is saying, well, which ID do you want to pull from? I want to pull from this note's ID. And then what parameters, just like I was showing here in the turning on and off of these parameters in the file, what parameters do I want to send it? Well, I don't want you to be doing row span. I want the first column to be called roster detail. I don't want you to be I don't remember that. What was that one? Yeah, I don't want you to be what's the first one? Oh, table row. Yeah, I want you to use the children's table row. I don't want you to use the columns using the children names. What's the first column name? It's row details. I don't want you to row span. And then I found out that I couldn't pass semicolons into through the macro into the function because that broke the parser. So I'm telling, much like I'm doing in here, where I've got variable names with semicolons and the dictionary formatting here. I had to mock the dictionary form using hashtags, and then in the function convert those hashtags back to colons and semicolons to get the parser to work properly. So by doing that, I'm essentially telling Tinderbox, take this information as if I were the note that was selected, pass that information to the function, and then insert table here. And so then if I render this note, here are the two tables, right? And what I can do now is, let's say now I want to say on this one, I want to say, I want you to not render that. And so now I get the full table. So you can see now I can insert tables into anywhere into my Tinderbox file from any other note using this methodology. Now, Mark Bernstein, so the two things, one, I get there's an alternative way. It would be kind of cool if we could be, if the occurrence of any could take a regex, but I understand there might be complications there. So the solution for doing that is to do a row count on instances in a list. So I'll work on that today. The other issue I have, though, that I was playing with is, you look here, I want to pass the table comment. And what I was realizing while I was doing this, and this is kind of interesting. So let's say in a table comment like this one, I've got action, variable name, v average children. So I'm averaging the age of the players on the roster, and I want to insert them there. So if I render that, let me go ahead and don't do that so it shows up. If I render that, unfortunately, that note's not showing up because for whatever reason, if I try to, and I can show you this bit of code. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Not to confuse people here. Here it is. Right. So what I found was, so if the function I have here is if there's a media library, if there's a media note, if there's data in the media note, then if there is a either markdown or some form of action code, I want to pass that off to my TBX config note and have the TBX config note process that action code and then pass it back. If not, I just want you to pass it back. For whatever reason, I found that even though in this context, I render that, so I'm rendering this code in the TBX config note using the T-render, renders just fine. But in the context of rendering it this way, basically passing the text off to TBX config, asking Tinderbox to render the TBX config note, and then pasting that data back, the value is not coming back for whatever reason. So I'm missing something. Yeah, Mr. Bernstein, your hand's up.
Yeah, my guess is that the problem is you declare the media note as a local variable inside the if clause,
Yeah.
which means that Tinderbox is free to assume it doesn't exist outside of that clause. Tinderbox is kind of leaky about scope rules, so it might leak through, but there's no reason to assume it will. And so the return may be returning an unbound variable, which is just an empty string.
Yeah, but when
That would be my guess.
I'll experiment it, but when I just did that and I pulled it out and put the variable, declared it all the way at the top, it still is giving me the same thing. So if I declare it at the very beginning, so now it's declared throughout. Oh, and it was declared throughout, by the way, already.
No.
So I declared at the very beginnings of the functions.
But the
maybe I declare it again. Can't hurt.
Yeah, var string v media note. If media note.
Oh, yeah. All right, let's see if that works.
Yeah.
No.
But you left it in. This is a dystopian way to debug.
Yeah.
More generally, just as a general observation, particularly for people who don't do a whole lot of action code. Earlier, we saw Mark Anderson, who had guarded against everything that could go wrong. And in addition, writing out exactly how it didn't go wrong, even though it couldn't go wrong. And when things are going batty like this, that kind of logging or testing can be really helpful.
Yeah. And so I just experienced this about a half an hour before the meeting. So I wasn't able to start that logging and testing. But so long story short, I'll fix that at some point. I'll figure it out. But that's what my new table library will do, is allow you to produce a table from any bucket of notes and then stick that table anywhere you want. And that's the project I've been working on this week. So Art, does that help you kind of get a sense of like what the installer publishing system is all about?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's so much going on under the hood these days. Like I was saying, it's kind of hard to keep track. And also, again, want to just add one point is about a lot of times when I approach a Tinderbox file, I really love to look at it as a blank slate and not install anything into it. And the ability to perhaps do that and retain that within my project file is something that sort of keeps me from willy-nilly installing the installers, if that makes any sense. And it's like an internal struggle. Because I never repeat. That's my issue. I never repeat projects or even methodologies towards projects.
Yeah,
From one
no,
to the other,
right.
every
So
file is different.
These might not be for you, but if you're an academic that has very consistent, constantly writing papers with the same format, business professional writing articles, white papers, social media posts, those kinds of things, then this is enormously helpful.
Yeah, I firmly believe I actually have not seen anything of its ilk anywhere in terms of this, like the constructor set aspect of pulling together academic or rather pre-planned documentation. It's fantastic.
Mr. Anderson, you have a hand up.
Yeah, very quickly. I've solved the actually I can just quickly show it. And of course Detlef's just gone, but never mind. He said, well, could you use a function to do the test we were doing earlier? So if I just reset this one. So first of all, this was the test we did. So we got these two that worked. And now if I do the same with the new stamp, I get the same thing. So what has actually happened is now that's just a log, but essentially where I was building this string, I'm now basically calling a function and saying if it's true, then check it, and if it's not, don't check it. And there's the function. In fact, it turns out I was doing one test too many as well, because when I was doing the is $ID of the stored number I have the same as the actual one would turned out to be a smell from some other code error I've made. So I'll remove that from the earlier test. It wasn't needed. So the only thing we basically do is we iterate through, because we get past the string of the note we want to, the descendant note we want to test, which is which the stamp makes up, a list of those, and then a list of all the terms we want to test. And so it says for the given ID, does the text contain an item? And it does it. So if you have 3 terms, this loop runs 3 times. And what I do is I'm collecting a true or a false value as a list. And then I get to the end and I'm saying, well, if I done the back to front. All right, so no, if it doesn't contain false, trip myself up there. So the exclamation mark says if the list of test booleans doesn't contain false, then my overall result is true. I pass that back, and that goes back to here, which means that this if test becomes a true or a false, and that is essentially the model that I think Detlef was alluding to earlier. I'm sure someone could write the functions more elegantly than me, but that basically proves you can get to the same point using a function at the side.
Perfect. And then may I share my screen again real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, Mr. Bernstein, let me show you this, riffing off of your comments just now. So let's say I had a TBX config note like this, and I copy this out and I call it hello world. And I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, vstring, export a string, text, render, t-render. And I'm going to not get anything back. Okay, I'll play with it. There's something with passing this exported string back, but I'll figure it out. I thought I was going to show you something, but then this is why, what did you call it? Debugging in this way is dystopian. You're absolutely right. We'll figure it out. But there's something going on in that handoff that I got to figure out. But that's exciting stuff. All right, everybody.
Very good.
Welcome. Thanks a lot. And
Thank you all.
We've got Jacob talking about AI again.
I'm gonna miss next week. I'm off to Mexico, so have fun, you guys.
Have fun. See ya.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.